partnership. And we have been in business for more than 7 years now. And we look after end-to-end implementation for customers all over the world. Whether it's Salesforce implementation, they are building a hybrid system with different systems inside of Salesforce. So we take care of that as well. Apart from Salesforce, we deal in Zoho CRM as well, but that's not a big part of our business model. And that's pretty much about us.
Welcome. Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and Metazoa?
Thank you. So I'm a veteran software designer and engineer. I built, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen enterprise apps over the years. And I got started with Salesforce back in 2005 and wrote the first third-party Salesforce app that I'm aware of, Dream Team, which you may remember. And we wrote a couple others, Snapshot. And to make a long story short, we now have a new company called Metazoa, and we're focused on the Snapshot application, which is an org management app that makes it easy for admins to manage their orgs, take care of security, compliance, move metadata from one org to another, and move data. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm a keen observer of the Salesforce ecosystem, and so ready to talk about some of the new things that are available here for the summer release.
Cool. So I've talked to both Bill and Piyush before the webinar, and both of you guys picked a couple things that you want to talk about. And Bill, I think we'll let you kick off with permission, with the changes that were in profiles and permissions. And some of those are just tweaks to what came out in the spring of 20 release. And I don't know if everybody's is up on those. So maybe you could talk a little bit about spring 20 and summer 20 in one go.
Sure. So summer 20 has the GA release of permission set groups. And I think in spring they had kind of the beta release, but now it's available everywhere. And so permission set groups are a great addition to the platform, and they're about anybody dealing with Salesforce. So if you go back to the beginning, say, 2005, 2006, the only thing you had was profiles. And a profile, every user had a profile, and the profiles were kind of where all the permissions were stored. And over time, they kept adding more and more and more permissions to profiles until they started to hold object permissions and field permissions and Apex permissions and maybe 10 other things, everything from record types to page layouts. And what happened is the profile kind of became this monstrous object that had all of this information in it, especially field permissions, because if you multiply, the number of fields times the number of profiles times the size of those things, you could get profiles that were, many, many hundreds of megabytes in size, and it became awkward. And the problem was really that if a user goes to their admin and says, I need this new permission, the admin really had one of two choices. They could either clone that guy's profile and add the permission to it, or they could just add the permission to his profile and forget about it. Well, if you do the first thing, you create another profile. And if you do the second thing, then you've just added more of an attack space, a security leak on your entire Salesforce org. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where profiles started. So does that all make sense so far?
Yeah, makes sense to me. I've been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so then they came out with permission sets. And permission sets, profiles are like this monolithic monster of an object. Permission sets were the exact opposite. They were sparse. And you could just put the individual profiles that you wanted in the little bitty permission set. And that was good. And it fixed that problem of the special cases. But really now you had kind of this monolithic profile and this atomistic permission set. So permission set groups, which are finally GA now on the new release, really fill that gap of, it's kind of the baby bear and the papa bear. This is the mama bear. And what a permission set group is, it's really simple. You can give it a name and it can hold any number of permission sets, and then you can assign the group. So now a user can be assigned a profile, a permission set group, or a permission set. And here's why I think it's really important, is because you really want your permission architecture to be understandable to a security administrator or to an admin, and it should really be human readable. It should have clarity, it should have context, and it should have meaning. And so now you can give the profile as the base. So let's consider a marketing user. Everyone in marketing would have the same profile now. You don't need to give everyone in marketing their own profile. The marketing profile should have the base permissions that make sense for anybody in marketing. And then if somebody needs an additional capability, give that capability a good name. Like say you've got a guy who needs access to the campaign system. Then make a permission set group, fill it with the right permission sets, and then anybody who needs that permission, assign them that group. And then let's say your marketing user also needs access to Einstein or something else like that. Then make that a permission set. And if you do it that way, you'll be able to look at the permissions in your org and see by inspection what they do. And this is just essentially you've taken all of that complexity out of the profile object and distributed it into an architecture that gives it meaning. And it's way better. So this is new for just finally in GA, new for summer 20 permission set groups.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I had one of my customers had exactly that issue. Is they have these nice profiles that work perfectly. Oh, except Mary needs, these 5 other things. Well, clone them or add them. So
Yeah.
permission set groups is a one-to-many. One user can have many permission set groups assigned to them, or is it just one-to-one?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point you're bringing up. So the way that a user gets a permission set, or the way that a user gets a permission set group, or the way that a permission set group gets a permission set are junction objects. And a junction object is a custom object that's got 2 pointers to the user and the permission set, or the permission set group. So one of the things that's happened is that, yes, we've moved all this complexity out of profiles, but now there's this web of assignments between users and permission sets and permission set groups that's kind of got some new complexity to it. And if you're trying to do all of those things through the setup menu and you have a big org, that could be an issue. So that's one of the things that our snapshot product tackles, is making that much easier to administer that. But I think that is a big issue. And one statistic I think that's really helpful is what's your user to profile ratio? Or your profile to user ratio, put it that way.
Right.
And if it's getting towards 1, one profile per every user, that's a really bad sign. If you have more, we've seen customers with say 600 or 700 profiles. That's not good.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Thanks, Bill. By the way, people who are listening, be sure to chime in if you have questions for Bill or Piyush. Piyush, one of the I think probably the biggest thing that came out, it wasn't a big release, but one of the biggest things that came out was some enhancement to flows. Can you tell us a little bit about your research on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, so flows is coming out to give the more ability to the end user or to the developers, the ability to customize and automate things more. And since the inception of flows back from a couple of years back, things are getting better and better every day. Now, what as a developer or as a consultant, the real challenge gets to you when you have to choose between a flow or writing a piece of code. That could be a trigger or a batch class or something like that. Now, I think it's getting in such a state that it's I mean, you don't have to think twice whether to go with pieces of code, that's a trigger or a batch class, or to go with a flow. And with this release, what users will be getting is like writing a flow before the data is committed. So like if you are writing a trigger, so it will give you the ability to write a flow before the data is getting committed to a database. So that way you can like validate a couple of checks or fill in a couple of empty fields. For instance, recently we were developing, not recently, this morning, actually we were
That's recent.
so we were actually in a phase where we were choosing between writing a trigger before a contract is saved
Mhm.
as a record, and the user wanted to save each contract with a end date of 6 months after it's saved.
Mhm.
So before we could like think about let's write a trigger to do that, we have the flow with us. So we created that flow, and yeah, it was much easier to do it. And now flows are also enhancing the debug facility in it. So you can also debug and put your debugs in it. So kind of like it's moving more towards what you could achieve in a trigger. The
Mhm.
flows are moving towards that direction.
Mhm. So, so basically, at some point here, where Salesforce is going, where they've been going all the time, is you don't have to write Apex to do a lot of the real common things that were done with triggers a year or two, a year prior, like
Yeah,
all these
yeah,
update triggers or pre-update
yeah.
triggers. Cool.
Absolutely. So it's moving more towards more clicks and less code. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Bill, work.com. Have you, is there such a thing? It's in beta release in this release. What have you done? You did a little research on that, I hear.
I have, and we've been talking to the team over there, and there's some very interesting things about it. I'd say it's one of the biggest parts of the new release. I'm not sure, it's a managed package, so I'm not really sure if it's officially part of Summer 20, but however you want to do it.
Right.
And work.com is all about reopening your company in the current crisis with COVID-19. And it provides a command center that really helps you see your employees and your facilities and how all that stuff is working together.
Mhm.
So if you think about Salesforce, you've got users, those are the people with Salesforce licenses, and you've got partners, and you've got contacts, but now they're really, and this is a very, these objects are new, either this release or the previous release. Now you've got some new custom objects, and one of them is called employee. And so employee really fills the gap there between a user and a contact.
Mhm.
And so now you can think about all of the people that are in your company that don't necessarily have a Salesforce license because maybe they're not on the sales team or whatever. And now, how can those people give you wellness information on a mobile app to tell you how they're doing? How can you organize the shift of workers? Maybe you want social distancing in your building. How can you have half the workers come in one time, one half the week or week, and the other half of the week? How are you getting the information from your workers about their status? I mean, um, are they at high risk of a disease? Are they recovered? Are they suffering symptoms? How can you get all that information and really collate it and then see it across all of your different facilities and organize all of that and make it work?
Mhm.
And so I think that's really important stuff. And if you look at what they've done and you look at some of the new custom objects that are available, kind of looking under the hood, maybe what Salesforce is thinking about in the future,
Mhm.
they've also got a crisis object, war, pandemic,
Oh
um,
wow.
natural disaster. I hope we don't use that object so much.
Yeah, I think once is
Um,
enough.
yeah, one's enough. But they're obviously thinking about this, about disruption and how employers deal with that problem. And I think they're wise to do so. Another part of work.com, which I think is kind of a different part of it entirely, is contact tracing. And I think that's really all about sales to large municipalities who are trying to do contact tracing.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure that will really be that useful to people who are running individual companies, but it might be. It's manual contact tracing, so it's a resource available to employees, and along with other wellness resources that are all part of it. So work.com is really interesting, and it's going to be here soon.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it's interesting to me about work.com. Two things. One is that the integration of Tableau and MuleSoft into a baseline Salesforce product. I think that's the first time. I'm sure you've been around a little more than I have, but that's the first time I've seen them bundle everything together like that and as one offering. So Tableau is offering the basically a dashboard of where COVID is going, just to give you, and it's just gleaned from public sources of information about COVID. And then the MuleSoft component is to pull data from your HR system to populate that employee object, as I understand it. Um, so it's kind of like they're right at the start saying basically we're just a sort of a sidecar system, and we're handling this little piece. That's uh, for our Force Xplenty Xforce conference a couple months ago. We had Matt Getz from Silverline CRM, and they're an implementation partner for Salesforce for healthcare, and they had done some things with COVID too. And again, it's a case where Salesforce isn't the core product that the enterprise is using to run its business. You know, a hospital isn't going to has these e-record systems, but those systems are so complex and so hard to change that they can't be part of the COVID response, or you know, so Salesforce comes in and just hacks off this little piece and makes that in the COVID response. I think that's kind of the first time I've really seen that happen with Salesforce, and it's kind of an interesting direction for those of us who know the Force.com platform and use Sales Cloud and so forth. So anyway, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's so agile, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, something like this happens, and they can really jump on it, and that's what's going on.
Yeah, it's agile, but the thing about it, and you know, obviously we're a company that does you know, ETL for Salesforce also. It's agile, but it's kind of an adjunct platform, but it's so agile that people want to turn it into their single source of truth for so many different things. It's kind of an interesting development in the platform. Speaking of things that aren't Sales Cloud, Piyush, you have a pretty good sized practice in Service Cloud, as I remember, and there's some Service Cloud upgrades coming in summer 2020 that you know about.
Yeah, one of the interesting upgrade that is coming up, and that relates to somewhat what Einstein is doing in Salesforce. So the Einstein engine is really going to help out in how the support staff is going to respond to a ticket, or if they are in a live chat with somebody, or in a live conversation on a case or something. So this is something that we are already seeing in Gmail. We are seeing predictive text. When I type in my email, I see predictions that, okay, you can send this note and this type of thing. So this is now coming to the Salesforce support. So whether you are doing a chat or you're replying to a case, you will see some predictive text. And this predictive text is being generated from the Einstein engine that Salesforce has developed. So yeah,
And how
this is
do you? Sorry, go ahead.
This is actually quite interesting, seeing that the world is moving towards predictive text and AI, and what Salesforce is doing with Einstein.
Are the predictions do they train from the customer's own Service Cloud cases? Does
Yes,
Einstein go through the cases and learn what the answers were in cases similar? Is that basically the idea?
I think so. I haven't got a chance to get my hands on it, but I
Hmm.
think so. From the preview and the videos that I got to saw, it looks like that they are very personalized to that specific org or to that specific user, what kind of usage or what kind of cases that. And I think it also learns from the cases and everything that user or that org has. So that's
Mhm.
quite interesting. And I think this will be very critical as well, because um, if you are working from home and you are on Salesforce, so you don't get a lot of help from your colleague and stuff. But
Yeah,
something like this would definitely help out in quickly resolving not all of the issues, but some of them. Getting a better response from customer service is always helpful.
cool. Now, Bill, your company works in your specialty is the metadata API, right? Salesforce. And there
Yeah.
was so the news on that is there's no news, right? Or very little was released
Well,
in
so
summer
they
20.
they release half a dozen or a dozen new metadata objects every release cycle, but they're not really exciting unless you're just kind of into the metadata API, you're into deployments. So um, it's not too much metadata news for us this release.
In general, I mean, you run a company that deals with deployment and makes heavy use of the metadata API. There's other companies that do that help documentation of the metadata API. It seems like there's always gaps in the metadata API where there's things that can only be done uh, with a click. Uh, is Do you see them closing that gap? Is there a day, since I have a metadata expert on the line, is there a day where you see uh, Salesforce having metadata parity where everything that you can do on the online you can do through a metadata call?
They're working on it, and there's a great web page that shows exactly what the gaps are on across all the different channels. So Salesforce calls these channels. So if you look at custom objects through the SOAP data API, and then you look at them through the metadata API, or you look at them through the tooling API, you'll see three different sets of objects. And that's what they call channels. These are ways that the API can talk about these objects. And so anyway, this web page has the different columns of what objects are now covered, what objects are not covered across all of the different channels. And so um, I think you're right. I mean, there's still quite a ways to go, and yet they're adding so many new things as well. So
Yeah.
that's really a big issue. But there's a lot of clever things you can do with the metadata API. I'll give you an example. We're coming out with a new report that will show you every place that a user is connected to your org.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll show you every place that user's email address is being used in your org. And it gets especially interesting if that's an inactive user. Because there's never in the history of Salesforce been a way to clean up inactive users. Never. And so that's what we're coming out with. And it's fascinating, but just today I noticed big deal alerts on the opportunity. You heard of big deal alerts? If there's a big deal, it'll send you an email or whatever. It's not in the metadata API, not in the data API. It's just not available. And so in situations like that, all we can do is really put a note in our product that says, and after we do all this for you automatically, don't forget to go check your org.
Yeah. I always used to give my Salesforce administrator a hard time about that when he was doing migrations, when it's like at the end, I have a spreadsheet, I've done all my migrations. Cool. All right. Piyush, you said there was an interesting thing you can do with URL hacking and Lightning when we talked the other day.
Oh
Can
yeah,
you tell us a little more about that?
yeah,
The
absolutely.
basic idea?
Yeah, a lot of things actually happened today. So another thing that we tested out today was the URL hacking.
Okay.
So it's a fancy word, I would say, but it's basically pre-filling forms when you open up a record or something like that. So this was a really popular thing when you were in Salesforce Classic. So what you could do is that you could basically replace the new button with your
Hmm.
own custom button, and in that button you can plug in a script, which is actually the ID of that what do you say the form field. And
Hmm.
what it would essentially do when you click on the new, it would pre-fill that form for you. For instance, the case that I told you about, where the contract date needs to be logged in as 6 months from the create date, right?
Hmm.
So what could actually, and on a contract, the subscription end date and create date is a mandatory field, and not everybody knows that what to fill in that when you're dealing with new employees or people who are just migrating to Salesforce. Now Salesforce is moving that feature from Salesforce Classic to Lightning as well, which I personally believe should have happened a lot earlier. Could have saved me a lot of
Yeah.
pain and customer frustration. So now
Yeah.
what you can essentially do is that you can replace that same new button with your own button, and you can pre-fill the form for the user. So you can pre-fill the record type, you can pre-fill a number field or something like that.
Well, that's nice. I mean, that was something that we made use of in Classic a fair amount at
Yeah,
one place where I worked.
it's a really minor feature, but creates a big difference for some use cases.
Mhm. So I kind of want to ask you guys a general question. This release was kind of a Salesforce normally does in a release. Any theories as to what happened there? I guess COVID is the reigning theory. Bill, why don't we start with you? Do you have thoughts on what's going on inside Salesforce and why did they change directions and have to push out work.com or?
Yeah, work.com was very disruptive, and I think some of the new features in the release fell out of commit.
Mhm.
And so I think between those two things, they're, but they'll be back here and they'll get work.com done and it'll all keep rolling.
Have you heard any rumors about fall 20, whether it's going to be more of a robust release or, I mean,
I have not.
okay, well, classical users, you did that for me yesterday. What's going to come next? But anyway, Piyush, how about you? Have you heard anything about why
Well,
Salesforce kind of backed off on this a little bit?
nothing that I know about the next release or I have heard of, but I mean, like Bill said earlier, that we are seeing new objects like employees come into Salesforce.
Mhm.
So I always saw a gap in Salesforce. Yes, you can use it for sales and everything, but you never had a connection between the HR system and the billing and invoicing system.
Mhm.
So, I mean, probably on the next release or maybe in couple of releases, we might see something related to billing. Invoice object could be a very good choice if that could be picked in or something like that. So that's one bit of my prediction that could may come true, and we'd be lucky if it comes true.
We've got a question here from Thiago in the comments. He's wondering if he has, this is probably for Bill, any comments about tooling API metadata component dependency? It might be interesting for org health solutions. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me,
Do you know what that means?
yeah.
Good.
So there's a new API and the tooling API. Whichever, if ever an API had the right name, it's the tooling API. Um, and what it does is it lets you say, what is this connected to? And so, like, you can have an object that might be a field that might be connected to another object, or that might be used in an Apex script, or that might be part of a report. And what are all of those dependencies? And so, as I think people know, one of the big issues is when you're migrating Salesforce metadata, you have dependency issues. So, if you're moving a custom object, you have to also move the parent of that object, or you'll get an error and you won't be able to move it. So, the dependency API is potentially helpful for exactly what the questioner asked about org health. I mean, you can look at it and see how things are connected and, and everything that's going on. So great question.
Cool. Great.
Hey, Leonard, I've got a question for Piyush.
All right, cool.
Hey, so my question is, when you're working with flows, how many versions of the flow do you see that you normally have, just looking for a number? And then if you deploy the flow, are you always deploying the latest version, or are you sometimes wanting to deploy one of the previous versions? Just kind of interested in your take on that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because as a practice, what we generally do is that everything is developed in sandbox, customer tests it out, and we then deploy it to production. But on a very practical note, what happens is that sometimes customer needs minor change. So you will duplicate that version in production on the go when the customer is there with you. You will test it out right away with the real data. But because you cannot actually create every scenario in sandbox and then test it out and follow the same kind of flow or the deployment practice. So in practice, what I have seen is that there could be like 5 versions of the same flow with minor tweaks, and it's not very practical to always deploy the latest version. Even if we do, it might have a minor change ultimately when it's put to use.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Do you find, Piyush, is your development practice now to use flows more extensively, or I mean, a lot of the orgs I end up looking at have flows, process builders, workflow objects, and Apex triggers, each of them doing similar things, but it just depends on what developer touched it. In your practice, do you try to, what's your discipline for trying to keep that complexity down in your?
So again, in theory, the practice is that go with the clicks and not code. This saves everybody a lot of trouble and obviously deployment and development time. But in practice, what happens is that sometimes you cannot judge between choosing a flow or a trigger. That's when the developer would have to make a choice whether to go with a trigger or with a flow. But this brings me to an interesting new thing that is happening with Salesforce, which is the Salesforce Optimizer app. Earlier, when we did deployment and everything was working okay, we used to like download the Optimizer PDF inside of Salesforce and show it to the customer that these are the things that will need your attention, like too many administrators in an org. Hello? Did the video stop? Am I still audible?
We see you.
Yeah, we see you.
Okay.
You stuttered for a second. So too many administrators in org.
Yeah. So too many administrators in an org, or you're using too many triggers, or you're using too old version of an API of Salesforce in a trigger and things like that. Now this optimizer app gives us the ability to see that kind of things going on. Like, but again, like I said, this is a new interactive feature that has come up in Salesforce, the Optimizer app. Earlier, it was just a PDF report kind of thing. So uh, from here, we can also pick that what's going on in that org and things like that.
Is that GA now? The Optimizer app?
Yeah, it's interactive. Earlier, it was a PDF report.
Okay, so that one GA. Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. Is there anything else in the summer 20 release that you want to talk about, Bill? Have you seen anything?
Oh, I can't really think of anything else that comes to mind. There's some new things in the bulk data API, but I didn't think they were particularly helpful. I got to go look at them again.
Mm-hmm. Piyush, anything you saw other than the Optimizer that?
Yeah,
So,
one last thing that I really liked about this release was the split view. So if
oh yeah,
you have used Salesforce and Service Console or maybe Sales Console, you will see that all your recent items and everything will be on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you will see the details of that record. Now, just like Kanban was introduced on the list view, they have introduced a new thing called split view, which
hmm,
is quite interesting. And what I have seen from the journey of Kanban, it has improved a lot of things. And what I always thought was missing from the main list view was something that could be related to the service console or the sales console. So now
okay.
they are bringing that in as well. So that's again an interesting thing for a new Salesforce user.
Yeah, I saw that demoed at our user group. I forgot about that. That was pretty cool. That was
Yeah.
major. Um, I'm just looking through the release notes. I don't really see anything else going on. Um, well, if unless we have any questions from the audience, I think we can probably get ready to wrap this up. Um, Bill and Piyush, why don't I let you just say a little bit about your companies once again and what you do, and if people are interested in learning more, where they should go. I'll start with Bill.
Thank you. So we build a product on the App Exchange called Snapshot, and it's an work management tool. And a lot of large Salesforce customers use it for compliance and security, and for metadata migrations, for data migrations. So really, we're all about empowering admins and making their lives easier, and especially providing visibility into Salesforce can become very, very complex. How can you visualize that, and how can then you do actionable things given the complexity of your work? So we've got a 14-day free trial, and so check it out on the App Exchange, a Snapshot.
Ayush, how about tell us a little bit about what you guys do, and
Yeah,
if people are
abs-
interested, how they can get a hold of you.
yeah, absolutely. So we are definitely partners of Salesforce, registered partners with Salesforce. And quite interestingly, we have three apps on App Exchange. And one of the one that we recently released was a Shopify connector that connects Salesforce and Shopify at the same
Nice.
time. You can sync your data from Shopify and to Salesforce or from Salesforce to Shopify. And there are other apps like I was a big fan of Kanban back when it was released. So we enhanced
Yeah.
that feature and functionality. And we have that app as well that supercharges your views using Kanban. And we also have Task Optimizer app that basically shows you the pending task, the upcoming task, and things like that in a pretty neat and easy way. And the good thing about these apps is that they're absolutely free. So they are coming out from us because we really love Salesforce and we love to contribute to our community of Salesforce. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's real interesting. That especially a Shopify connector. I bet you people really like that. I'm going to close. Thanks to both of you for participating. This is interesting. Uh, Love to hear about uh, Salesforce. And those of you in the audience who are administrators and have a interest in uh, have a interest in org complexity, which I think is pretty much everybody who's in the audience, who's an administrator. You might be interested in our next webinar series. It's called Unpretzeling Your Org. The person who's giving it is Michelle Hansen. She's a senior sales administrator at NISC. And basically the idea is that a lot of orgs have issues because of what I call the kid in the candy store effect. Somebody comes in, they just started with Salesforce, and they go and put use every complex feature in Salesforce, and then say that administrator departs, or they stay and they're like, oh, what have I done? Michelle's presentation is going to tell us her approach to simplifying the org on a step-by-step basis and making it more usable and more easy to administer. And again, that's on August 6th. And everybody who's signed up for this webinar will get an email telling you about that one. So thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Casey, who's behind the scenes keeping this thing going. And thanks to everybody who joined. And have a good day. And we hope to see you again at the next webinar.
Thanks, Leonard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.